A galaxy at peace, or so they thought. The war had finally ended. Across the vast reaches of space, the Galactic Union celebrated its greatest victory in history. For decades, the brutal conflict with the Selfar Dominion had consumed entire star systems, turning once thriving planets into lifeless husks, filling the void of space with wreckage and the echoes of dying civilizations. Millions had perished, fleets had been annihilated, and entire planets had been reduced to dust. But now, at long last, peace had returned, and the galaxy could finally breathe again. In the grand halls of the Union's capital, high-ranking officials raised their glasses in victory, their voices filled with relief and triumph. Across the galaxy, banners of war were lowered, soldiers returned to their families, and the citizens of countless worlds believed that the nightmare had ended. The Exelfar, the once feared conquerors, had surrendered unconditionally, their mighty empire shattered beyond repair. Their fleets had been dismantled, their leaders imprisoned, and their remaining forces scattered like dust in the cosmic winds. But peace, as history had often shown, was a fragile thing. Far from the celebrations, in the cold emptiness of deep space, a long-range surveillance station picked up an anomaly. Something unexpected, something that should not exist. The operators monitoring the vastness of the void barely noticed it at first. Just a small blip on their scanners, an unidentified movement far beyond the recognized territories. But as minutes passed and the readings became clearer, confusion turned into unease, and unease turned into fear. "Commander, we have an unidentified fleet approaching the war zone," one of the officers reported, his voice tense with uncertainty. A fleet. The station's commander frowned as he leaned closer to the glowing holographic display. "That's impossible. There shouldn't be any active fleets in that sector. The war is over." The officer hesitated before responding, his hands trembling slightly over the controls. "Sir, they're not transmitting any known identification codes, and they're moving in formation. Fast." The commander's expression darkened as he studied the incoming data. Dozens of ships, possibly hundreds, all moving with calculated precision, closing the distance with eerie silence. "Who are they?" he muttered under his breath. Another officer, scanning deeper into the system, suddenly paled. "Sir, their ships don't match any known Union or Selthar design, but their energy signatures, they resemble something from the old archives." A chill ran down the commander's spine. What archives? The officer swallowed hard before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, these readings match ancient human warships." For a moment, there was silence. A heavy, crushing silence that filled the command center with a suffocating weight. The name human was one that had not been spoken in military circles for centuries. They were a civilization lost to time, a species that had vanished long ago, a mystery that had turned into legend. "Humans." The commander scoffed, forcing out a nervous chuckle. "That's ridiculous. The humans were wiped out ages ago. Their worlds were abandoned. Their fleets disappeared. There hasn't been a trace of them in over 200 years. The officer hesitated before replying, his face pale with uncertainty. "Then how do you explain this?" On the holographic display, the unknown fleet continued its approach. Their ships were unlike anything the Union had seen before, massive, angular, and radiating an aura of cold, calculated efficiency. There was no communication, no request for identification, no signal of peace, just movement. Silent, deliberate, unstoppable movement. A feeling of unease settled over the entire room. The commander straightened, his jaw tightening. "Send a priority transmission to Union High Command. Inform them of the situation and request immediate reinforcements." The officers nodded, working swiftly to send the message across the network. But just as the transmission beacon activated, a warning alert blared across the control panel. "Sir," another officer shouted, his eyes wide with fear. "They've intercepted our signal. They're blocking all outgoing communications." The commander's blood ran cold. "Impossible. They're not just jamming us," the officer continued, his voice trembling. "They're overriding our systems. They've already taken control of our defense grid and our weapons." The commander's hands clenched into fists. What kind of technology is this? Then, for the first time, a transmission came through. It was not a request for surrender. It was not a warning. It was a single, chilling message. We were never gone. And in that moment, every officer in the control room realized a terrifying truth. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The control room was drowning in fear. Every officer stood frozen, their eyes locked on the glowing transmission screen where those chilling words had appeared. We were never gone. The commander, a seasoned veteran who had fought through the bloodiest battles of the Selfar War, felt something he had not experienced in years: pure, unshakable fear. His mind raced for answers, but none came. How could this be happening? Humans were nothing more than a myth, a lost species wiped out long ago. Yet here they were, not only alive, but commanding a fleet unlike anything the Union had ever encountered. The silence in the room was unbearable. Then, without warning, a second signal came through. This time, it was not a simple message. It was a live feed. The holographic display flickered as a figure appeared, a humanoid, clad in a dark, high-tech combat suit, its visor obscuring the face beneath. The voice that followed was deep, calm, and filled with a terrifying certainty. The Galactic Union declared peace. You believe the war is over. You are mistaken. The commander swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. Who are you? The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused by the question. Who we are does not matter. What matters is that you have forgotten. And we have returned to remind you. The commander's heart pounded. Humans were wiped out centuries ago. This must be some kind of trick. A brief pause. Then the voice responded, colder than before. A lie repeated often enough becomes truth. But the truth does not forget. Before the commander could react, alarms blared across the station. The security officer's voice was frantic. Sir, we have hostile activity in the system. The fleet. They've begun moving. The holographic display zoomed out, revealing the horrifying reality. The human fleet, which had remained eerily motionless just minutes ago, was now advancing straight toward Union-controlled space. Their ships were moving in perfect synchronization, like a pack of predators closing in on helpless prey. The commander turned back to the transmission, his voice laced with desperation. What do you want? The war is over. The Selfar surrendered. There is nothing left to fight for. For a moment, the figure said nothing. Then, when they finally spoke, their words sent a chill through the entire room. You misunderstand, Commander. We are not here because of the Selfar. We are here because of you. The commander's breath caught in his throat. What? The figure leaned closer. Do you truly believe we disappeared? That humanity simply faded away? No, Commander. The Union did not forget us. They erased us. They hunted us. They feared what we could become. The officers in the control room exchanged uneasy glances. The Union had a long and complicated history, filled with secrets buried under classified documents and forgotten battlefields. Could it be possible? Could humanity have survived in the shadows, waiting for this very moment? The figure continued, their voice unwavering. Your leaders tried to silence us. They thought they had succeeded. But you cannot kill what refuses to die. And now, we are here to finish what you started. The transmission cut off. Then, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, all human ships activated their weapons. A single word appeared on the commander's screen. Retribution. The war had not ended. It was about to begin again. Panic spread like wildfire through the command station. Officers scrambled across their consoles, issuing frantic orders while red warning lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. Enemy fleet is advancing. One officer yelled, his voice barely holding steady. They've locked onto our defenses. The commander's hands gripped the edge of his console. His throat was dry, his mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the disaster unfolding before him. Humanity was supposed to be a relic of the past, wiped from history like a bad memory. But now, they were here, and they were not just fighting. They were hunting. "Activate planetary shields," the commander barked, snapping out of his shock. "Scramble all fighter squadrons. We need to hold them back until reinforcements arrive." "Sir, shields are charging, but the humans are jamming our long-range communication. We can't call for backup," another officer reported, panic in his voice. The commander's blood ran cold. If they couldn't send for help, then they were truly alone. He turned to the tactical display, eyes scanning the incoming fleet. The human warships moved with terrifying precision, each maneuver perfectly calculated, as if they had rehearsed this moment for centuries. Their fleet was not just powerful. It was disciplined, ruthless, and far more advanced than anyone had expected. "Sir, incoming." The warning came just as the first human strike hit. A blinding explosion erupted in space as the outer defense platforms disintegrated under the impact of high-energy kinetic rounds. Unlike plasma-based Union weapons, which burned through shields, these projectiles tore straight through hull plating and bulkheads, sending debris scattering into the void. The Union's defenses had never seen this kind of firepower. The commander watched in horror as their frontline defense grid collapsed within seconds. The human warships weaved between debris fields, using them as cover while their railguns fired with pinpoint accuracy. The officer monitoring the fleet turned pale. "Sir, our weapons aren't locking onto them properly. It's like they're predicting our every move." Of course they were. The commander clenched his fists. "Humans are predators," he muttered under his breath. "They don't just fight wars. They win them before the first shot is even fired." But he wasn't ready to give up. "Redirect all firepower to their lead battleship," he ordered. "If we can take out their flagship, we might be able to disrupt their coordination." The order was given. Massive plasma cannons fired in unison, sending deadly bolts of energy across the void. The shots raced toward the human battleship at impossible speeds. For a brief moment, the commander allowed himself to hope. But then, something impossible happened. The battleship shifted, adjusting its angle by the smallest degree, just enough to slip through the incoming fire. The plasma bolts missed by mere meters, their energy dissipating harmlessly into the void. They dodged. An officer stammered in disbelief. "At this range, that's impossible." "No," the commander whispered. "That's human warfare." His mind raced. Humanity wasn't just attacking with brute force. They were adapting. Their warships weren't just powerful. They were learning the Union's tactics in real time. The enemy fleet pressed forward. The humans had not fired a single shot in retaliation. They didn't need to. They had already broken the Union's defenses. The realization hit the commander like a hammer. This wasn't just a battle. This was a lesson. Humanity wasn't here to fight. They were here to prove a point. A transmission suddenly came through. The same dark figure from before appeared on the screen, their helmet reflecting the chaos around them. "Now, Commander," the voice said, calm and controlled. "Do you understand?" The commander's heart pounded. He had never been more afraid in his life. The war was not over. It was only the beginning. The command center was silent, a silence thick with dread. Every officer, every soldier watching the battlefield knew what was happening. They weren't just losing. They were being dismantled. The human fleet moved with eerie precision, striking at key weak points in the Union's defenses. They didn't waste firepower. Every shot counted. Every maneuver forced the Union fleet into a worse position. It wasn't war. It was execution. The commander gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists as he watched another one of their capital ships explode into a burning wreck. "They're cutting through us like we're nothing," one officer whispered. "Sir, we have to retreat," another shouted, panic rising in his voice. "If we stay here, they'll wipe us out completely." Retreat. The word burned in the commander's mind. He had spent decades fighting wars, leading fleets, securing victory after victory. And now he was standing here, watching his forces crumble before an enemy that shouldn't even exist. "No," he growled. "We are the Union. We do not run from lesser species." But deep down, he knew the truth. The humans weren't lesser. They were superior. "Sir, the humans are hailing us again." A cold shiver ran down the commander's spine. He turned to the communication officer, his face pale with fear. "Put it through," he said, his voice barely steady. The view screen flickered, and the human commander appeared once more. Their face remained hidden behind that reflective helmet, but their voice carried no rage, no arrogance, only absolute certainty. "You are losing, Commander." The words cut deep. "You know this. You feel it. You see it in your men's eyes." The commander's fists clenched, but he said nothing. "We have given you every opportunity to surrender, yet you refuse." The human leaned forward slightly. "We are not here to negotiate anymore." Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. The officers scrambled to check their screens. A new signature had appeared on their radars. No, not one. Dozens. Hundreds. "Sir, they've encircled us," one officer whispered, his voice shaking. "They played us. We walked right into their trap." The realization hit like a thunderbolt. The human fleet they were fighting was only a fraction of their true force. The rest had been hiding, waiting for the Union fleet to commit. Now, there was no way out. The human commander tilted their head slightly. "You thought we were attacking." Then their voice dropped, colder than ice. "This was never an attack." The commander's blood ran cold. This was a demonstration. At that moment, the human fleet opened fire. Not just at the Union ships, but at their escape routes. The shots were surgical, precise. Every ship that tried to break formation found itself cut off, trapped in the tightening net of human firepower. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was slaughter. The bridge shook violently as a nearby dreadnought was ripped apart by kinetic rounds. Explosions filled the void, turning space into a storm of fire and debris. "Sir, our ships are being annihilated," an officer cried. "We have to." Then it happened. The view screen flickered again, but this time it wasn't a human. It was the Union's Grand Council, the highest authority in the galaxy. The council leader, an elder with wrinkled skin and piercing eyes, looked furious. "Commander," the leader growled, his voice barely hiding his anger. "What is happening? We have lost communication with the fleet. Explain yourself." The commander turned, his throat dry. He wanted to say something, anything. But what could he say? That humanity, the species they had mocked and ignored, had returned. That they weren't just fighting, they were winning. That the greatest military force in the galaxy had just been outplayed like children. Before he could speak, the human commander's voice cut through the silence once more. "Your war is over." And then, the final blow came. A massive human warship, larger than any the Union had ever seen, decloaked directly above the planet. The commander's breath caught in his throat. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. Sleek, deadly, built for one purpose: total domination. The warship charged its main weapon. And the commander finally understood. This wasn't just the end of a battle. This was the beginning of humanity's reign. The Union's forces were in complete disarray. What had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy was now reduced to burning wreckage. Debris drifted through space, the shattered remains of warships that had once been symbols of strength. The battle was no longer a battle. It was a massacre. On the Union flagship, the commander stood frozen. His officers were shouting, begging for orders, but his mind refused to work. How had this happened? How had they miscalculated so badly? For centuries, the Union had ruled through fear, through numbers, through overwhelming force. No species had ever challenged them. No species had ever dared. Yet here they were, losing. To humans. "Commander," an officer screamed, snapping him out of his trance. "We have to retreat. There's no way to win this." The commander's hands shook. Retreat. That would mean admitting defeat. That would mean acknowledging that humans had become the superior force. A loud beeping sound suddenly filled the bridge. "Sir, the human flagship is hailing us again." The commander swallowed hard. His throat was dry. His mouth tasted of bitter failure. He turned toward the view screen, his voice hoarse. "Put it through." The screen flickered. Once again, the human commander's helmeted face appeared, unreadable, unshaken, completely in control. "This is your final warning." The words were spoken calmly, without emotion, without hesitation, without mercy. The commander clenched his fists. You want us to surrender." A pause. Then the human spoke again. "Surrender is no longer an option." The commander felt his stomach drop. We have laws of war," he stammered. "We have treaties. You can't just." "Your laws." The human tilted their head slightly. "Your treaties. Do you think they mean anything to us?" The Union commander's breath caught in his throat. "When your fleets crushed weaker species, did you follow the laws of war? When you bombed planets into submission, did you honor treaties?" The human leaned forward. "No, you didn't." The bridge was dead silent. Every officer, every soldier, every person on board felt it. The humans were not here to negotiate. They were here to finish what the Union started. The human commander's voice was low, steady, deadly. "Now you will learn what it means to be powerless." And then the human fleet moved. The annihilation begins. In one synchronized motion, human warships launched their final assault. Kinetic slugs tore through Union dreadnoughts. Missiles bypassed shields as if they weren't even there. Entire formations were erased within seconds. Ships that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked. Ships that tried to fight back found their weapons disabled. Ships that tried to surrender simply vanished in fire and destruction. The Union had always believed they were untouchable. That belief died in flames that day. And the galaxy watched in horror, from distant observation posts, from neutral planets, from hidden corners of space. The truth spread like wildfire. The Union's great fleet had fallen, and humanity had done it effortlessly. A desperate plea. The commander of the Union flagship collapsed into his chair, his body trembling. This was it. The end. A war that had lasted generations, gone in a matter of hours. He stared at the human commander on the view screen, his voice weak. "Why?" he whispered. "Why are you doing this?" The human didn't respond immediately. When they did, their words were like ice. "Because you thought the war was over." A pause. "But we never forget." The commander closed his eyes, accepting the inevitable. The human fleet's weapons locked onto his ship. A single command was given. Fire. And with that, the last symbol of Union power was erased from existence. The galaxy was silent as the last Union flagship turned to fire and debris. The once mighty fleet was now nothing more than wreckage, floating lifelessly in the darkness of space. On the bridge of the human command ship, the crew watched the destruction unfold, their faces unreadable. The battle was over, but there was no celebration, no cheers of victory. There was only the cold, heavy truth. This was not just a battle. This was a message. The Union had ruled through fear, through overwhelming power, through crushing opposition before it could rise. But now, the roles were reversed. The Union was no longer the predator. It was prey. A transmission request appeared on the screen. A Union diplomat, face pale and eyes filled with dread, pleaded for communication. The human commander gave a slow nod. The screen flickered, revealing a figure dressed in regal military robes, their expression tense, their posture stiff with fear. "You have proven your strength," The diplomat began, voice shaking. You have shown that humanity is not to be underestimated. But please, the war is over. You do not need to continue this destruction. We surrender. The human commander remained still, silent, unreadable. For centuries, the diplomat continued, voice growing desperate. Our people fought wars, controlled regions, and maintained order. We believed we were ensuring stability in the galaxy. We did not realize. You didn't care, the human interrupted. The diplomat faltered. You ruled through force, destroyed those who opposed you, wiped out entire civilizations without remorse. And now that you stand on the other side, you ask for mercy. The human leaned forward. Did you ever offer mercy? The diplomat lowered his head. The human commander exhaled slowly. You thought the war was over. That was your mistake. You thought you could attack our worlds and walk away once you had what you wanted. But war doesn't end when one side decides it should. It ends when justice is served. The diplomat opened his mouth as if to argue but stopped himself. He knew there was nothing he could say to change what was coming. A silent order was given. A single human warship moved forward, its weapons aimed at the Union's last remaining outposts. The diplomat's screen flickered with warnings from his own forces, alerts of systems being seized, fleets being neutralized, stations being occupied. The Union had lost not only its army but its home. The human commander spoke one last time. The Union is finished. You will never rise again. And the galaxy will remember why. The transmission cut out. From the distant reaches of space, the watching civilizations held their breath. Humanity was no longer just another race in the galaxy. They were its rulers. The Union's last stronghold trembled under the weight of its own fear. From every communication channel, desperate voices cried for help, but no help was coming. Their once mighty fleets were reduced to scattered wreckage. Their outposts had fallen. Their armies had surrendered. And now, the humans had arrived at their capital world. From orbit, the massive human warships loomed over the planet like silent gods, their weapons locked onto the towering structures below. The once proud banners of the Union, symbols of centuries of power, flapped weakly in the wind, as if they too sensed the end approaching. In the grand chamber of the Union High Council, the remaining leaders stood in silence, staring at the transmission screen. The face of the human commander filled the display, calm, expressionless, the embodiment of judgment itself. This is the end of the Union, the commander said, voice devoid of emotion. You ruled through oppression. You conquered through fear. And now you will answer for it. The High Chancellor, the last remaining symbol of the Union's rule, stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. We surrender. The war is over. A long pause followed. Then the human commander gave a slow nod. Yes, the war is over. The High Chancellor let out a quiet breath of relief. But the human continued. And now, justice begins. A single command was given. From the warships above, controlled explosions erupted across key military installations, non-lethal, yet precise. The Union's remaining war factories, research facilities, and shipyards were erased in an instant. The infrastructure that had once fueled their conquests was no more. Then, one by one, human ground forces descended. They moved with quiet precision, unchallenged, unstoppable. The citizens of the Union did not resist. They simply watched as their world changed before their eyes. The humans did not slaughter. They did not destroy aimlessly. Instead, they dismantled the very system that had kept the Union in power for so long. The corrupt officials, the war profiteers, the enforcers of oppression, they were removed, taken into custody, tried for their crimes. The people of the Union, for the first time in centuries, saw something they had never known before. Freedom. Weeks passed. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the great Union Empire crumbled, not under fire, but under the weight of its own sins. Without its corrupt leadership, Without its fear-driven rule, the Union could not stand. And in its place, something new began to rise. The human fleet did not stay to rule. They did not claim the Union's territory as their own. They had no interest in becoming the next empire. They simply left, their message clear. Humanity did not seek to conquer. They sought justice, and the galaxy would never forget what happened when they arrived.